Hello, everyone. I'm so glad you're here, and thank you for coming to today's Play Attention webinar. My name is Gwen Sorley, and I will be your host today. I really do appreciate you taking out some time today to chat a little bit about executive function assessments and how assessments can actually help us in whatever process we are right now. And so I'm really glad you're here, and I hope that you will take this time to reflect on your personal experiences because you're all here for a reason, right? You took aside or you set aside 1 hour for yourself to engage in this webinar. So I want you to gift yourself this time and really take this time to process what we're discussing. Think about your particular situation and how an assessment may help you along your journey or your child's journey or your entire family or your clients. And so you may be taking a little bit of a new perspective as we go through this process, but please really do take some time to process, pay attention, think about what we're talking about and how it may help you in your journey. Many of you are here because you may be looking at an assessment, possibly for yourself as an adult, or perhaps you are considering an assessment for your child, or you have a variety of clients. If you would, go ahead and type in the chat box. Why are you here today? You knew that we are going to be talking about executive function assessments and that process and how it can help figure out a path. So, who are you here for? Is it a child? Yourself, another family member, or maybe your clients. Okay, or Rob says pretty much all of the above, self, child, and clients. Chip says for himself. Excellent. Toby says, I have ADHD. Jason for clients. Uh, Andretta, myself, and possibly a child. And Efren, my son, and myself. Lots of pretty much all. So Kelly says, I agree, pretty much all. All right. Chelsea says, executive functions are very shy. Me and a friend. Excellent, Maya. Thomas says, interested in this for self, and then clients need tools for a better baseline and outcomes assessment. Excellent. Patricia has ADHD. So you can see there are a variety of answers, and many of you are here for multiple family members or clients or all of the above. So I'm glad you're here because you may have a child who has difficulty focusing. Or maybe for you, organization feels like a constant battle. Maybe you know what needs to be done, but getting started is incredibly difficult. Maybe tasks are started, but rarely finished, right? Or perhaps time seems to disappear. Deadlines are missed, and every day feels more reactive than planned. So I'm sure some of those statements resonated with you. And knowing that you are overwhelmed is one thing, but knowing what is creating that overwhelm and what to do about it is a completely different thing. And that's what we're going to work on today. Okay, so you may be feeling, Mike says, I am actively multitasking and failing to pay attention. This is a problem. And it is. And so when you say, Mike, that you're actively multitasking and failing to pay attention, those are some behaviors, and we're going to look at how we can get to the root cause. That's why we're here today, because when we can go beyond the behaviors and look at the root cause, then we can make a plan. So, Mike, that is a really important statement that you just made. So now we're going to look at what we can do, right? Once we discover that root cause. So this uncertainty may often feel like you are kind of in a fog, and the fog can be from different reasons. So perhaps you have this high effort but low yield, meaning you feel like you are working incredibly hard, but the results don't match your effort. Do any of you feel that way? You can raise your hand, or you may see this in your child as well, where you think, gosh, he's working so hard, but it just doesn't seem to be helping. A lot of you are raising your hand. Excellent. And that is so common, right? You might look at your colleagues at work and think, why am I taking all this work home on the weekends? It doesn't seem like anyone else is taking this work home, but I am. I'm working so hard, and yet I'm not getting the results that match the effort I'm putting in. Or maybe you feel stuck and overwhelmed, like you're in this cycle here. If you look at the screen right now, you see this cycle. Some of you might be able to relate to it. You're constantly putting out fires. Or, like we said earlier, every day feels reactive instead of intentional. You know something isn't working, but you can't really pinpoint why. So if you're tired of feeling stuck and overwhelmed, you're in this cycle and you're ready to finally understand what's getting in the way, right? So for Mike, it might be, why are you constantly multitasking and failing to pay attention? What is really getting in the way? Then an assessment, and the assessment we're going to talk about today, can be a really good starting point. Or maybe you're just tired of guessing what to do. Do any of you feel like you're just guessing, right? You're just taking little bits of information here and there, and sometimes you just go down that rabbit hole of information online, right? And you try all the focus hacks and you try the apps and the planners and the strategies that are recommended. You read the books. I work with a lot of clients who say, my bookshelves are full of books that have tips and strategies, but none of them seem to really work for me. And I don't know what really fit my particular situation, right? So if you're tired of guessing, just guessing what to do next and trying different strategies without knowing whether or not you're really solving the right problem, then assessment can give you a little bit more clarity. Okay. And I think this one is really important because many of you probably feel like you're going in circles without making real progress, right? You make the same resolutions, and yet you're not really seeing any meaningful changes, even though you might be working really hard. And I think this is an important one to keep in mind if any of you have a child that's going back to school soon and you tend to start the school year the same way every year, right? You hope that this year is going to be better, but you don't really have direction. You don't really have the clarity on the root cause why your child struggles in school. So you go through summer thinking, well, summer's going well, and hopefully, the new year, new classmates, new school, maybe new teachers, that's going to be the difference. So you start with this hope that things are going to be different. And the school year may end up in this cycle where it starts out going really well. So you continue to be hopeful, but you don't put any real plans in place, any targeted accommodations or targeted steps to help your child develop skills. And so the school year starts pretty well. He or she may start pretty strong, but then as the year progresses and the assignments get a little bit more complex and the social interactions become a little bit harder, and then we see that downward spiral that we typically see during the school year. Mike says, I've been trying to understand neurology. It's a sea of lily pads and deep holes. Well, hopefully, this will really give you some direction, right? Because if you feel like you're living in this fog of overwhelm or that you're guessing or just going in circles, an executive function assessment can really help. And that's why we provide this tool. Now, some of you here, as I look at the individuals who are chatting, some of you here are already Play Attention clients. And so you may have already started your Play Attention program. You may have already done a pre-assessment with us and gone through the executive function assessment already. and then we customized your plan based on that. But maybe you're going through and maybe you're 20 hours into your play attention program and you want to reassess to see how you're progressing and some changes that you can make going forward. Or maybe there's a new client or family member that you want to customize a plan for. That's why it's important that all of our current clients are here as well. And if you are not currently working with play attention, this is a good starting point to give you that roadmap. And we're going to talk about how that assessment process works and what the roadmap looks like, because that is important. So, just before we go any further and really talk about the assessments itself, this is part where I want you to, again, kind of reflect on why you're here. What's most important to you? So, if you think about your own daily life or your child's life, what is the biggest source of frustration right now? This can be for yourself, for your child, your partner, your clients. Type one word or a short phrase. So it might be focus. What is most difficult right now? Focus, time, organization, memory. Go ahead and type in the chat box. Schoolwork, if school's already started. Well, a lot of you are saying procrastination. Yep. Chip says forgetting. Lizelle says all, less, kind of everything. So you're right there with Lizelle. Sandra says forgetting. Kelly, again, procrastinating, time management, focus and starting, says Yvonne. Wow, a lot of really good answers. And I'm glad you're taking this time to reflect. Jason says clients are struggling with focus and time management. Excellent. Mike, retention and returning to the path after I diverge. In our play attention program, we call that the recovery time, right? The time it takes from the time you lost your attention to the time you regained it. What does that look like? And how can we improve it? Misha also says all of the above. Maya says dealing with ADHD friend. Okay, so Maya, it sounds like you're here to help a friend. That's excellent. So these difficulties, everyone put their own experiences right now, and they can look separate, but they often are connected through the brain's executive function system. And that's what we're going to look at. So we're going to identify the root of daily overwhelm, procrastination, all of these things that you said you're struggling with. And so that means that we're going to move beyond statements like, I can't focus, right? A lot of you have said that in the chat. I can't focus. Or my child's just so disorganized. So we're going to move beyond those statements and look at specific executive function skills underneath those problems. So we really have to get to the root cause. And then I'm going to show you the assessment advantage, so that you'll see what an actual executive function assessment process looks like and how those visuals, which I think is really important because a lot of us are very visual people, we can reveal patterns that are difficult to see beyond our day to day. So you might see your day to day observations and make comments, but when you see it on paper, it can give you so much clarity and a great starting point. And so that's what we're going to talk about as well. Once we have that visual, we have all of that information, how do we take that and move forward with a customized path? So, executive function, and I know many of you here are very familiar with executive function, right? You can think of it as your brain's management system, right? I often call it the CEO of your brain. It's what allows you to control your attention, your behaviors, your emotions. It allows you to plan and prioritize, organize, avoid procrastination, and remain on task. So executive function is actually a set of mental processes that we use every day to get things done. And so our brain's management system, that executive function, it helps us decide what needs to happen, when to begin, how to begin that task, how to remain on task, right? How to stick with it, how to monitor our progress, how to make adjustments, and then finish. And that all sounds pretty straightforward, doesn't it? But if we think about, let's think about one common area that some of you may be struggling with, and that's getting out the door on time. Okay. How many of you here, and you can raise your hand, how many of you here have a hard time? You are chronically late, or your child is chronically late. You're struggling just to get out the door. Okay. Many of you, about a quarter of you have raised your hand. Right. So a lot of us are struggling with that. So it's not just about getting out the door on time, right? Think about how many skills are involved in something as simple as getting out of the house on time. Think about all the skills you need, right? You have to remember what you need to take with you. You have to estimate how long it's going to take. You have to stop one task in order to begin another. So you have to be mentally flexible and be able to transition. You have to resist distractions, right? So that as you're moving to the door, you don't get distracted by, oh, that laundry in the corner of the room that I should have moved earlier. So you have to resist those distractions. You have to keep track of all of your belongings, right? You have to have that spatial awareness. And you have to notice the time while all of this is happening. So getting out the door is not one skill. It's actually a collection of executive function skills that need to work together. Okay. So that is really important when we look at the behavior. The behavior is not being able to get out the door on time, but it is more than that. It is a collection of executive function skills that have to work together. So that's why it's so important to go further, to go deeper, because one of the reasons executive function challenges create so much conflict, and I'm sure many of you are experiencing that, is that we often respond to the behavior without identifying the skill that's missing. Okay, so this is part where, again, I really want you to reflect on your own experiences where you may be reacting to the behavior rather than taking a moment to identify the skills that are challenging. Okay, so let's think about one visible behavior. Let's think about your child and their experience at school. So let's say that your child is just not working, right? Just not putting in any effort into homework. So if you just look at that behavior, you might interpret that immediately as he's just lazy, right? She doesn't care, or he's choosing not to listen. He's obstinate, right? How many of you have had that thought and no reason to feel any guilt about it? It's very natural reacting to a behavior. How many of you have had that thought, or maybe you've had that said about you? When you are having a hard time getting started on something, someone may say, oh, sometimes you're just so lazy, right? Where that might not be true. Jennifer says despair, right? That can be really challenging because the behavior is not really the root cause. So, underneath that behavior, there may be several different explanations. So, it's not that he's being lazy or doesn't care or is choosing not to listen. The skills may be the instructions may not, the child may not know how to break the assignment into steps. Okay, so maybe it's just the assignment's so big and your child doesn't know how to break it down, so they're overwhelmed. Or maybe your child just doesn't know which part to do first, right? Or maybe your child, and you can probably relate to this as well, your child gets started, but then suddenly becomes distracted by something else in the room or maybe some internal dialogue and loses track of the original goal, right? So the same visible behavior can come from very different executive function problems, or it can be a combination of skills that are challenging. Okay. Rob says, went through school labeled that way. Exactly. I think many people here today can relate to that, Rob, that you went through school and people just said, oh, you're just lazy. You don't care, when that is very far from the truth. Mike says my inner bully has these expectations, right? And that can almost be the worst bully, is the one that's inside, right? And that internal dialogue can continually derail us, because the more you have that internal dialogue playing, the more challenging attention, task completion, impulse control become. So I'm going to give you a few scenarios, okay? And I want to give you a scenario, and then I want you to type in the chat box and tell me what executive function might be challenged in that scenario. Okay. And we're going to do this practice together so that when you get into your office and you're having some challenges, or you're trying to help your child with homework, or you're working with a client, instead of just focusing on the behavior, you take time to reflect on what is the actual root cause here? Okay, so this is scenario one. Let's say that you, as an adult, because many of you here are looking at an assessment for yourself. So you have an important report that's due on Friday, and you've been thinking about it all week long, right? It's due Friday. You've known about it, you've been thinking about it, but you don't start it until Thursday night. What executive function skill? So don't tell me the behavior, not lazy or procrastinator, but what is the skill that is challenged in that scenario? Go ahead and type in the chat box if you think about those different skills. Right, Jason says planning. Exactly. That's an executive function skill. Many of you, Efren, Sandra, Helen, you're all saying task initiation. Exactly. Emma, good. Maya, time management, task initiation, staying on topic, time on task. Excellent, Jennifer. Toby, planning. So you see, we went beyond the behavior, right? Oh, Adretta says the perfectionist. Perfectionism does often go hand in hand with ADHD, doesn't it? And because there is that perfectionism, it gets very difficult to start because your expectation is here, and that becomes very overwhelming, because then the emotion regulation, right? That's really the root of perfectionism. You start getting this emotion dysregulation, which is an area of executive function. And you feel it's more about how you feel about that task and your ability to do that task, especially if your expectation of your abilities is way up here. Mike says analysis paralysis. Absolutely. Sandra says perfectionism. Amen. Does that get in your way oftentimes? Very good. So notice how we went beyond, right? It's not just, oh, I just am horrible. I put everything off until the very last minute. That's the behavior. But the skills, the executive function skills that need to be addressed, as time management, task initiation, planning, organizing, those are specific skills that we can address. All right, let's think about a child. So let's think about your child, and your child completes most of the math assignment and does pretty well. However, your child leaves three problems blank, forgets to write his name on the paper, and then ultimately never turns it in. I bet many of you with children have experienced this. So really does get started, but leaves three problems blank, forgets to write his name, and then never turns it in. What are some of the skills that we're looking at here? What skills can we address? Aaron says working memory. Exactly, Aaron. That's a very good detail to bring up. So, working memory is a skill within executive function. And in that scenario, that child was losing track, right? Working memory is that ability to hold all of that information on his mental sticky note. I have to finish all of the assignment, every single answer. I have to write my name on the paper. I have to bring it to school, turn it in. That requires your child to keep all of that information, all of those steps on his mental sticky note in order to complete that task. And like Aaron says, if working memory is challenged, then that process is very difficult. Emma says time management. Efren also says working memory, persistence, focus. Absolutely. Good job. So you see how we're reframing things. And I hope this process is helpful because it really does allow you to move a little bit forward when you can reframe in this way. So let's look at a common occurrence for children and adults with ADHD. And many of you have brought it up. That's the feeling of overwhelm. And when executive function demands exceed a person's current skill level, right? Because that's what we're identifying as the skill level, the result is often overwhelm. But overwhelm doesn't look the same for everyone, right? One person may completely freeze, right? That's the analysis paralysis that someone brought up earlier. So it may be that they completely freeze, or another person may just simply avoid, or someone else may become really irritable, has a hard time controlling emotions. If you have a child, if your child's overwhelmed, they may just leave the room or argue or say, I just don't care. Um, as an adult, you may just start reorganizing your desk instead of beginning the important project at hand. So let's do a quick poll, and you can type your answers in the chat box. When you or your child feels overwhelmed, what usually happens first? Is it avoidance or procrastination? Is it emotion reaction? Is it distraction, rushing, or impulsivity? Shutting down. Emma says, I get emotional. Andretta says avoidance. Jason says procrastination. Rob, emotional. Maya says impulsive. Aaron, emotion reaction and shutting down. Myron, procrastination. Efren, a combination. Wow, a lot of you, avoidance and emotion. Avoidance and emotional shutdown. Flustered, says Thomas. Yeah, Mike says it depends on where I am. It can be all of these. Absolutely. So it can be dependent on the situation or even who is around you at that time. So notice how varied these responses are. The word overwhelmed. So if we start there and you just say to yourself, gosh, I'm just always overwhelmed, and or my child's overwhelmed. And that word, right, gives us important information, but it doesn't tell us which skill we need to support. And that's what we really have to discover, right? We have to kind of be executive function detectives where we're looking at what is the actual skill. Here's the feeling that overwhelmed, but what is the skill that needs to be supported? And if we are always looking at the observable behavior, Kath, Kathleen says, I always wrote my name on the paper before starting my test or homework. So that shows, right? You have developed some strategies, right? And many of you here as adults, you've tried these strategies. But what I find with adults, strategies are good, right? But oftentimes you have so many strategies that you're trying to keep up with. Those strategies can cause overwhelm, right? Because again, you're using so many strategies, you are working incredibly hard. And so we want to have strategies in place, but then get to the root cause to develop skills so that you don't have to work so hard. You don't have to have so many strategies, right? Yeah, Emma says what you say about strategies resonates with me. Absolutely. Because we want you to have those strategies in your toolbox. And we're going to talk about that because we provide you with strategies. You know, I've been in this field working with individuals, children, and adults with ADHD for over 30 years. I've been using play attention with my clients since 1996. So strategies are good. We want to have those. We want to have some accommodations. But in order for those strategies to work, we have to get to the root cause. Okay. And Emma, what you just said was going to be my next point. Emma says, and what coped previously, what helped her cope previously, those strategies now don't work at all in my 50s. That is incredibly important statement because all of a sudden, especially for women, as we age and we have changes in our hormones, those strategies that once worked for us no longer work. And so it is really important to move beyond just strategies and develop skills. And that's why when we are always looking at observable behaviors. A lot of well meaning people give us advice, right? But the general advice often fails. So if you are telling someone, just try harder, right? Telling someone to just try harder. And I know many of you, when I said that out loud, many of you cringed because you're tired of hearing that, aren't you? But if you hear just work harder, that doesn't strengthen your working memory. Or if someone says, I know you can do this, just get started. But someone saying just get started doesn't resolve your deficits in task initiation. Chelsea says 100% flinched. Yes, absolutely. Uh, yes, there will be a recording later. And if someone is constantly saying, you just need to be more organized, because if you were more organized, you would be on time and you would get your assignments done. Okay, you can say that, and I'm sure you're trying to be well-meaning, but telling me to be more organized doesn't help me create and maintain systems. So again, we want to identify the root cause, go beyond the observable behavior, and also go beyond just general advice. Even if general advice may be coming at you, or you may be saying it to your child or your clients with good intentions, but we have to go further, right? And I mentioned this, that I've been working with individuals with ADHD for over 30 years. And so there are often, I notice, four different stages that people typically come to me with, right? And you may be able to relate to one of these four stages. And as I go through them, I want you to kind of think of what stage you're in. So the very first stage, which is common, is that something is not working, but you can't identify what the problem is, right? Something's wrong, but you cannot identify what it is, right? So they may say, everything feels hard, or we struggle every day, or I can't keep up. My child is capable, but his performance is inconsistent. So there's something wrong, but you can't identify what the problem is. The second stage is that they can identify some of the difficulties, but really don't know how significant they are, right? So they may know that time management is difficult, for example, but they don't know whether it's a primary issue or one part of a larger executive function problem. So, how significant is this area? And oftentimes you may even think, well, yeah, I think that working memory is a problem for my child, but is it really significant, or is it just an 8-year-old being eight, right? So sometimes you really need some clarity on how significant it really is, right? In the third stage, you have a fairly good idea of what the problem is, but you still don't have a plan. So that third stage is where I talk to a lot of individuals who come to me and they say, I have a 23-page neuropsych evaluation, 23 pages of information, great information, but I have no plan. So what do I do with all of this information, right? And so, and Emma says she's in stage 3. I figured out I may have ADHD a few years ago, but only got my diagnosis last year at age 55, and I don't have an action plan. And so many people, Emma, are in that realm where you have the idea, but you don't have a plan. Okay. And then there's that fourth cycle. And this is that fourth, or I should say stage, not cycle. The fourth stage is where we want to go, right? And that's the road that we are on right now. We're talking about how do we get to stage 4? And that's where we have specific knowledge and an actionable plan. So we know where the areas of greatest difficulty are. We recognize not only challenges, but also people's strengths. And we understand which concerns should be addressed first. And we have practical next steps. Okay, so many of you have already written down. Are you in stage one, two, three, or four? Let's take a moment and take a quick poll. I should have put a poll on the screen so you didn't have to type. But where are you in these stages? Okay, interesting. We have a wide variety of answers here, but it seems like a lot of you are in, a friend says he thinks he's in stage two. A lot of you are in stage three. The majority of you that answered are in stage three. That is where you have a lot of information, and that information is great, but you have no actionable plan beyond that. Okay. Excellent. Yeah, a lot of you are saying you're in stage three. Chelsea says it's a good point. Stage three, and the executive dysfunction is keeping me from stage four. That's a very good point. So, Chelsea, we're going to show you how you can move in a very simple way, right? Because you may be in stage three and it is just overwhelming, right? To go to that next stage. So, why is the overwhelm there? Well, let's get to the root cause. It's hard to plan and initiate those next steps. So we're going to break that process down and show you how you can actually break it down into a, a, a customized plan, right? Step by step. So without an assessment, we often begin the most visible problem, but we really have to understand the complete pattern because oftentimes there's overlap. It's hard to know where one challenge ends and the other begins. So we don't want to just look at the most noticeable behavior, but we want to really understand the pattern, the entire pattern for that individual. Okay. And this is the advantage of an executive function assessment. An executive function assessment helps us replace broad assumptions with more specific information. So we look at a variety of, and this is one of the executive function assessments that we provide with Play Attention. And I love it. We've just started using this particular one. We've used different assessments in the past, but this one has a true advantage. We look at several areas of executive function rather than reducing everything to one general area or label. So we look at plan management, we look at time management, organization, emotion regulation, and behavior regulation. So again, we are replacing those assumptions with a structured profile, an overall profile of your executive function. And it identifies relative difficulties, hidden strengths, and a baseline. It gives us a baseline for change. Okay. So let me show you how this works. The very first process is, of course, you will actually will need your date of birth because the assessments are norm referenced. And this is just a consolidation of the answers to all the questions from one of our clients. And now you're going to rate yourself or your child or your client in these different areas. Very often, sometimes never. We go through a series of questions. And this looks like paper, but actually, online, when we send you the link, it's one question at a time, so it's not overwhelming. One question, you answer never, often, always, sometimes, and then it goes on to the next question. So I would plan on, I think there are about 21 questions in all. So to go through that process, I would plan on just maybe 15 to 20 minutes to really reflect on each question and answer. It may not take you that long, but really when you're going through this process, reflect and make your best decision when you're answering those questions. And then at the end, this is what I love. You get this visual. There are about four additional pages of written information in each of these areas. But look at this visual, and I'm going to show you on another screen what this all looks like. But you get an overall executive function assessment score, and then we break each individual area down. So again, instead of just looking at the behavior, we look at each individual area and where the difficulties truly lie. So if you look at that very first graph that you saw at the very top, um, that individual, one of our clients, was in the 97th percentile for executive function difficulties. Okay. And that is an important point when reading this particular assessment, because you want to keep in mind that the higher percentile score validates that this is not a small inconvenience. The higher the score, the more frequent the difficulty. So, this overall executive function score shows us that this person is not seeing executive function challenges in one small isolated inconvenience. There's a meaningful pattern that really does need some attention. So the sample report displays the score, the percentile, the difficulty, and then we look at not only the overall score, but we also look at the 5 different categories within executive function. So this is what you may not have been able to see because it was a little bit small when I showed you what the report actually looks like. But this is the client's breakdown. So plan management was in the 98th percentile. Time management was in the 96th percentile. Organization in the 77th percentile. Emotion regulation was in the 50th percentile, and behavior regulation in the 90th percentile. So you may have some guesses of what your profile would look like or what your child's profile would look like. But when we can consolidate that information that you provide and give you a visual, it's so empowering to see that these are where the difficulties lie, right? And not all of the different areas within executive function had the same level of difficulty. Plan management, time management, organization, behavior regulation. For this particular individual, these were all concerns. They were all very high. But emotion regulation appears to be a relative strength. And that distinction really matters. Because imagine if we just assumed that this person's difficulty, um, imagine that this person's, sorry, I was looking at some of the questions here. Imagine we assumed that this person's difficulties were primarily emotion because frustration often occurs. The assessment actually suggests that the stronger starting point for a plan is not really emotion regulation because that's actually one of their strengths. It's more time management, behavior control, and organization that's leading to the frustration, not the emotion regulation. So that's why we look at the whole pattern. Okay. So based on if you just look at this profile, where would you begin? Where do you think we should begin with our plan? Right. Many of you are saying probably plan management, right? Plan management, time management. So we can clearly see where our plan should begin. So that goes back to who was it who said they don't know how to move on to the next step. So now we just answer some questions, right? It was Chelsea. You answer some questions, then it's automatically consolidated and then gives you this profile picture. This is where your executive function challenges really lie. And also, this is where your strengths are. And the strengths we also want to keep in mind because that's important part of the process is that keep in mind strengths are part of your roadmap. Okay. So this gives us really important information because emotion regulation for that client is a relative strength. And it can mean that that person can remain relatively composed, but still has significant trouble creating plans, estimating times, getting started, monitoring their own behavior, or following through. So the person may appear calm and capable while privately working extremely hard to manage everyday responsibilities. Okay. Right. Yeah. So the reason for those different colors actually was just for my graph. There are some slight color changes on the actual graph, just to differentiate between the different skills. But that particular one, I was just highlighting that particular strength. And Maya says, so does this mean he's in stage three? Well, at this point, when we just finished that assessment, we gathered the information, but now we're going to use this information, right, to move this client into stage four. And that's exactly what we did, Maya. That's an important question, right? How do we use all of that information in order to create a plan? And that's the stage four. So, again, the assessment doesn't just stop with the graph. It also explains what each category means. So, for example, and you can see some of the examples here, but for behavior regulation, that can include thinking before acting, controlling responses, considering consequences, and maintaining goal-directed behavior. So it gives you a graph, but then you have about 3 more pages of information where it gets a little bit deeper into explaining what each category means. Okay, so again, consolidating that information in stage three and then using that information. So we have the raw data. And then the raw data, though, as Maya's bringing up, it's just not enough. We have all of this information and it's valuable information, but the report alone isn't a complete roadmap. So a score can't tell us everything about a person's life. It doesn't tell us what's happening at school or at work or at home. It doesn't know what problems it's creating or where the greatest amount of stress is. It doesn't know if the person's sleeping well or experiencing high stress or dealing with major life changes. So that's why we combine that raw data with a 40-minute feedback session with myself or one of our other executive function specialists here at Play Attention, because we want to take the raw data, but then we need to know more to get the full picture. And when we can walk through that 40-minute feedback session, we can connect the report to the person's actual experience. And that's a really important part. So we do the reporting, we create that report, and then we'll get together on Zoom, one-on-one Zoom call, so that we can put this information with daily life context. Okay. So we identify the high friction areas. Um, and Maya says history background should be done. Absolutely. We can do that during that feedback session. It is very important. So we identify the highest friction areas. We connect the scores to daily life. We want to recognize strengths. And then within that conversation, we can select the first priorities and practical next steps. So the roadmap begins with identifying those difficult areas and the strengths, but we don't necessarily automatically start with the highest numbers. through that conversation, then we can really decide if, what we need to work on first. And we don't just hand someone 15 changes to make at once because that would create overwhelm. We identify the first priorities and build from there. So again, we'll do the assessment, do that 40-minute feedback session, and then the customized plan based on that feedback session and the raw data allows us to have a very customized plan of action. So this is moving us into that stage 4, where we talked about we all want to get to that stage 4. And we're going to have different strategies and cognitive training. So we talked about how tools and strategies can be helpful. We want we want you to have those tips and strategies. So it may be breaking a large task into visible steps. It might be planning, maybe planning backward from a deadline, right? Because we talked about earlier, we have something due on Friday, but we knew that on Monday and didn't start until Thursday. So maybe planning backward from a deadline or rescheduling certain tasks. So we're not taking on too many tasks. We have better time management. It might be scheduling review points so that we have specific times where we're reflecting. So all of those supports can be really helpful, and we want you to have those. But we also want to look at skill development, right? Because a planner, we can talk about a planner, and many of you probably have 20 planners that you've purchased over the last 40 years, or you may have just gotten your child a very new, nice planner for the new school year. But remember, a planner is a tool. It does not automatically strengthen attention, working memory, impulse control, cognitive flexibility, or the ability to remain on task. And in order for that planner to work, we have to get to the root cause and develop skills so that the planner actually benefits us. So the strategies have to be combined with specific cognitive skill training. Okay. And that's where play attention's plan comes in, because we are going to target those individual cognitive skills that right now may be challenging, but required for executive function. And as I mentioned, many of you here are current play attention clients, so you know that what that process looks like. Some of you may not have seen play attention before. So this is where we pinpoint the different cognitive skills like sustained attention, working memory, task completion, discriminatory processing, which is your ability to filter distractions, auditory processing. Everything that I'm mentioning and that you see, the different cognitive function modules that you see on the screen, those are specific exercises we can put into your play attention plan. And you are assigned a focus coach. So once we go through the assessment process, have your whole plan of action, you're not left on your own. You have a focus coach, and your focus coach is assigned to you to help you with this process every step of the way. And when you start your program, then your focus coach is going to take your customized profile that we've developed, pinpoint those cognitive skills, put those into your play attention plan, and then take you through an onboarding. And an onboarding is basically a practice session to make sure you're real comfortable with everything before you get started. And then when you're doing your play attention sessions, you're actually working on skill building, right? You're getting to the root cause and developing skills. This is where you're going to be wearing our body wave armband, which you see on in the graphic here. On the back of this body wave armband are 3 sensors. When you slide this armband on your arm, those sensors are monitoring your brain activity that tells us how attentive you are. And then that information is given over to the computer where you're allowed to control all of the cognitive exercises just with your mind, or more specifically, your attention alone. And you receive constant and immediate feedback as to whether or not you truly are focused and paying attention. And that's a really important first step in the learning process because right now, attention for many of us, for many of your children or your clients, attention's really abstract, right? You may look at them and say, I need you to pay attention. And they think, I am paying attention. And they really don't know what that means. Chip says, I have a mandatory meeting, how starting soon, but you're interested. How do you get the assessment? And Chip, I am going to send the assessment to everyone immediately following this webinar. So, and I think I might have it. Let me see if I can uh, send it. Okay, yes, I will send it in an email, Chip. I'll make certain that you get it. Okay. Um, so then once we bring you through that onboarding, remember you're going to be monitoring your attentive state, and we're going to give you that real-time feedback regarding your attention, which is so important. Okay, very, very important because now attention is no longer abstract. It's concrete and controllable. All of the exercises, whether you're working on attention stamina or task completion or working memory, you have to be paying attention. If you're not paying attention, then the activity will stop or the character will go in the wrong direction, and you have to focus back in order to continue. And the reason we do this is because we know the very first catalyst necessary for brain change is attention. You can have a great teacher, a great counselor, but if you're having a hard time paying attention to that individual or the process, then it's hard to get maximum benefit. So that's why we make certain that no matter what you're working on, you are actively engaged. All right, so your personal starting point, and I'm sorry I went a bit over. I just realized how late we were running, but I want to give you your starting point. Um, the time frames, Mike, for the play attention program, I think that's what you're referring to. Why don't you go ahead and type that in? I'm going to go through next steps because I know some people have to leave, and then we'll have a Q&A time left at the end as well. Okay? So I want you to think as you move throughout your day, I want you to again reflect the daily problems that may be creating the most stress. What is the executive function skill that's involved? And the first change you would like to see. Okay. I want you to reflect on those three areas. And again, it may be for yourself or your child because we want to start getting out of this fog, right? The trial and error loop in order to have some data-driven direction. This is how you move from being stuck to progress. Okay. And this is the next step. If you would like to, if you're in stages 1, 2, or 3, and you want to really focus on looking at doing our executive function assessment, so then we can have that time where we look at the raw data. Remember, raw data is not enough. We're going to send you that great visual, which will give you a lot of information, but then it's important that we know what's truly going on in your day to day so that we can customize that plan with both strategies and play attention to get to the root cause, to get to those specific skills. So just to start that next step, and if you would like to go ahead and do that executive function assessment, we're offering the assessment and that feedback session for $50. So $50, if you have multiple family members, it's just $50 per family member or per client. We will send you a link. Again, we will need the date of birth because they're all norm referenced. So remember, task initiation can be a challenge. So let's go ahead and try not to procrastinate on this because this is important information that can truly make your life so much easier and help you move away from that fog. I appreciate your time and look forward to speaking again in the very near future. Take care.